That's right, my friends. It is episode 98. And in this episode, we have a new person that has never been on the show before. Steven, Steven from South Texas. He talks about the scale he models. And some of the ups and downs of that and all the good stuff in between. So stick around because, as we always say, guess what? We're going to get the show on the tracks. Welcome back, my friends, to episode 98. As we said in the intro, we have another special guest, first time on the show. Steven, he is from South Texas. He is a listener. First time he's been on the show, and it's a good interview, which we'll get into here real quick. I'm not going to bore you with a whole bunch of stuff right now. However, going into this, mind you, we are talking about large scale. So large scale can really mean a whole basically like G scale up to like what Eric, our good friend Eric, does, 1-inch scale. However, most of the time when people talk large scale, they're thinking of G scale, and there are different scales of that, and he kind of discusses that a little bit in this episode with us. But he goes through and talks about some of the ups and downs of having an outdoor garden railroad, and he's rebuilding and building right now, and he talks about that. But there again, going based off of our last episode, talking about rebuilding and stuff and being scary, he was in a sense forced to do this because of weather. So it's he kind of goes through and explains that. So just another inspiration of, hey, if you're unhappy with no matter what scale you're at, or if something happens, it's easy to rebuild, pick up the pieces and rebuild. So before we get any farther, let's move right into our interview with Steven, and we'll chat with you at the end of that. So here we go. So as I stated at the beginning here, we have Steven with us. He is from South Texas. He reached out to us by email. It's been a few weeks back, and talking about his modeling. And before we get into, we've had different scales of modeling, and this is one that we really haven't had a lot of conversation on. But before we get into that scale, Steven, thanks for coming on to the show.
I appreciate it. Feeling very welcomed.
Oh, good, good. That's what we want here. So let's just start with some basic questions that we always do. A lot of listeners like to know, how long have you been into model railroading?
I think probably like most model railroaders, even if you can't identify exactly how long you've been at it, it's as long as you can remember, and like everybody have some general fascination with trains or automobiles or anything that moves or modeling in general.
Right. Yep. I get it. I've actually talked to people that didn't get into model railroading until later in life because they always had in the back of their mind, well, I'm going to do it when I retire. And it's like, well, you wait until you retire, then, you might as well enjoy life now. Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of, when we were kids, we had a very old, 100-year-old house, and the attic was like something out of one of these Conjuring movies. But way, up in the attic, we had um, it was the 4x8 sheets, but we had three of those, and it was this monster layout with large scale, and then HO in the middle. And my dad was really it was kind of like his railroad, and there was the stuff that
Mhm.
like we could touch and not
Right.
touch, and the large scale was on the outside, and the HO stuff was on the inside, and that's kind of just you're just watching everything go in circles and everything derail, but that was just that's kind of what made me get into it, really
Mhm.
as a kid, just watching it and then always wanting to bring the large scale stuff. I want to stay outside, but wanting to, I had heard like later on as a kid that you could do that. It's like, no, you're not bringing those outside. And that's like, now that I'm an adult, I'm like, guess what? I'm putting them outside.
Right, right. Well, that answers basically our next question. What was your first exposure to model railroading? Which I think is a lot of most generally, a lot of people is when they were children. I would bet probably 95% of model railroaders have um, that first exposure was when they were kids, in one form or another.
Yeah, agree. And, you know, I, I really didn't like get into the model railroading until probably after college when I was in my 20s, but my whole life, I feel like my grandfather had a contract with the CSX Hump Yard in Western New York. And as a little kid, I mean, I don't even, there's no way that legally I was supposed to be out there, but just hanging around with him, on the hand car where you'd pump it up and down and just watching the cars go and leaving just change all over the place for stuff to run over and having the Arcade and Attica steam excursion service, doing that a few times during the summer, always around steam locomotive. I mean, just being able to put my hands on
Yep.
rail equipment constantly as a kid, and then moving away and just, it's almost like not because being homesick, but it was like bringing some of that stuff out to where just putting it in the backyard almost kind of made you feel like you were at home. And that's really how I started going with the large scale stuff outside.
Sure, sure. Now to move on, you just said you model large scale. Um, when did you get into large scale? Was it kind of like when you said, or did you try other scales before you got into large
Right.
scale?
I originally, we had a smaller townhome and had a small little area that I had a shelf layout that was HO scale. And we had moved and bought in a house, but what we really bought was a backyard with a very small house. And we had a lot of real estate outside, but not so much indoors. And just through, being married and having a few children, the usable layout room of the house where we did have where we brought my shelf layout and set it up, and I had basically had a swing door in there was my expansion.
Yeah.
Once the nursery room got overcrowded, it was kind of like, well, like your train stuff is done, and I kind of looked outside. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to do something, it's I got an acre back there with a bunch of trees and nothing there. I'm like, I guess, you know, see if I can get some of this large scale stuff from when I was a kid that was just sitting in my parents' basement for a few decades and set it up outside. And the way I went on that adventure.
Sure. Now, when you say large scale, and I know we talked about this before the show, when we were getting set up here. Um, there are different scales. I guess there's a range of scales in the what they call the large scale or G scale. What particular scale do you do?
So, honestly, I think maybe probably just this past year, I've wrapped my head around what really G scale is, and I feel like G scale is almost how O scale is, where there's like a toy element, and then there's the prototype
Mhm.
faction of the scale. Um, what I have is 122, but
Okay.
um, most of the Sirius or the rivet counters are going to be in like 120.3, which is like your narrow gauge or what they'll call F scale.
Mhm.
I kind of have a, I want to be F scale, but I don't have the F scale budget. So a lot of my
Right.
stuff is the 122 scale, and then it's got a lot of extra details and styrene and other things like kind of pumped in to make it, look like it's that slightly larger scale. So I'm running narrow gauge equipment on the G
Mhm.
scale rails.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's all in what you like, first of all, and secondly, who's to say that if down the road you wanna be a rivet counter, you can't go and get or, 3D print or whatever details to make what you have more prototypical. Not saying what you have is, because 'cause I've seen the pictures, not saying what you have is toy-like, but there's always that option to be able to add
Right.
that
And I
finer
think,
detail.
yeah, when you're outside too, um, there's an element of, your stuff is outside. So
Mhm,
you can only put so much into it if your equipment and you're constantly handling it and it's outside and, a storm comes in, you have to make it so that it's going to take whatever Mother Nature gives it.
mhm.
And that's the same with like your layout structures and when you physically build your layout outdoors.
Right. So that goes back to the old adage. I know there's and you were talking like the rivet counters and stuff. There's people on one side and the other and right in the middle. How much detail is too much detail? And this would be, I guess, from what I'm understanding with you, is a good example of, yes, you would love to have all the extra detail. However, there's a limit because, like you said, of handling it and being in that outdoor element. You throw a whole bunch of detail in something, maybe some of those finer details aren't gonna last, so is it worth putting that effort into it, you know?
Absolutely. And you can't, like, I've tried, like, I've had some really good, trying to work on my weathering and,
Mhm,
you're going to have to seal everything. You cannot leave that little powder coat or, if you're working with the pastels and
mhm,
whatever you get with that dull coat or whatever clear coat you're using or flat finish, that's what it is. And Mother Nature, some of your stuff, when you leave it out, I mean, it gets a little natural weathering too and a little bit of paint fade.
right, and probably that natural weathering's you can't beat that. A, it's free, but, and there's no effort to it, but it how much more prototypical can you get?
Yeah, it tests your paint job abilities and, for sure. Clear coat is very powerful.
Right, right, and very powerful in the good way or the bad way, depending on how you do it.
Yes.
Um, so if you wouldn't mind, give us, I guess, give us what your current layout is like, like what your setup is and what you've got done, and I guess what
Right,
you
all
are.
that good stuff.
Yeah.
So, I had a fairly large layout. It was about 500 feet, and this past year we had a pretty substantial hurricane, and a lot of trees came down, and I don't want to say the layout got destroyed, but about half the layout had extensive trestles and bridges that were a few feet off the ground and all that. It was
Mhm,
damaged so badly that it was not fixable. So right now I'm down to probably about 220 feet of just working on like a main loop for this year and then um, trying to do the other stuff next year for the operations and
mhm,
getting the switching portions nailed out. There's only uh, I have one power connection to the track. So there's two uh, 12 gauge wires, and then all the track is hooked together with rail joiners. So there's no need for feeders or anything like that, or no bus line.
mhm.
That's the one thing that I've noticed between going from the smaller scale to the large scale, just with the power supply. I thought I would need to run wires along the whole length of the track, and I just have one connection and
Mhm.
it stays, that is probably the most enjoyable part with the large scale that I've noticed so far.
Sure. Now, I know we talked about this, but for the listeners, um, I guess I know I've heard and seen questions like this in groups and stuff as far as, powering. You said you have one set of feeders. I know, like, on example, my railroad, of course, I'm running DCC. I can tell especially in my stage right now, I've identified a few places where I have to put some more feeder wires on the track. Do you notice, I guess, in that scale, any
where it
like
drops.
performance? Yeah, like power drop or anything, or
No,
is
and
it?
I think a lot of that is because the rail is so large that
Mhm.
the conduit that it is for electricity, and there's, to break it down, like for somebody that's familiar with HO, like my rail is basically what the equivalent is of code 100. It's
Okay.
332, and you can have smaller, more prototypical size rail, which is called code 250, which would be code 83, and then
Okay.
there's 215, which is code 70. But with having a layout it's sheltered by a bunch of trees, every
Mhm.
little thing that falls down, I that extra little bit of rail height is critical for operation. And
Mhm.
the brass rail that I have is extremely durable. My children are track walkers, so when they're
Mhm.
going out and playing in the yard, that extra stability on the rail for little
Sure.
feet walking on it is keeps the railroad up and running.
Now, here's a question for you, and now, mind you, through this interview process, I'm getting, I'm making taking mental notes because as we spoke uh, before this, I'm actually planning on hopefully in the next couple of years, nothing the size like what you have in your backyard, but putting in a small one out front once we do our landscaping in G scale. Um, is there flex track in G scale? And if I guess what how do you lay what's available for track? I mean, you
Right.
obviously there's different gauges, but and you said brass, but what in comparison
Right. So
to
there's nickel, silver, there's aluminum, there's
Mhm.
steel. For I so I mean everybody that model railroads, everybody has a budget. And
Mhm.
the price, like people are very sensitive about when you start talking about pricing and everyone's budget and what they can afford. The rail that I have, my rail is 50 years old, and
Okay.
it's everything I've acquired. I have never purchased a new thing for my railroad. I was fortunate enough where I didn't get it in an estate sale, but it was, someone who was looking to travel, and I paid a sum of money, and they had all their stuff in boxes, and I drove 3.5 hours and
Mhm.
picked it up. But what I've seen from everybody is you can expect to pay $2 per foot when you're buying used track and large scale because it's
Okay.
so durable, it just does not expire. But
Okay.
you can bend it. I mean, it's very user friendly. I mean, you can literally put it over your waist or your leg and push down on it and
Mhm.
shape it yourself, and it's very easy to hand lay. I had no problems hand laying track as long as you have a gauge where you can cut little. Some of my track is just cedar strips, and then I have copper nails that I just nail on either side, and you just sit at a
Oh, okay.
picnic table and you can build it yourself. The rail is fairly inexpensive if you want to do hand laid, but depending on where
Mhm.
you live, just like a regular railroad would, you're going to have to treat your ties so that they're
Okay.
not gone in 2 years.
Sure. Now, I guess so like you said, depending on where you live, like so if like up here in Iowa where we get, like right now, the last week it's been in the 60s or low 60s, upper 50s, and then next week or for this upcoming week they're predicting snow and cold weather. Um I guess in that situation, would you recommend to somebody that okay, maybe go the manufactured route just because maybe a little more durability or
For anybody that's starting, I would always recommend to just get
okay.
the manufactured route. And I everything I have is the not that anybody's sponsored by anything, but the
No.
LGB branded ties are
Okay.
um, they hold, like solar wise, where I am in South Texas, it's 100 degrees plus for 3 months, and then we had snow and ice this winter, and the stuff is outside. And
Sure.
the 5 years that the stuff has been sitting out in tornadoes and hurricanes, one I mean, one year we had a hurricane, and the whole layout was underwater for a week. And
Wow.
when everything went down, Um, after we had, cleaned up, I just for the sake of it, I turned on the transformer, like I hooked it up and put a train out there, and the train just went right down the track, like
Really?
after being submerged, like in a,
Wow.
I think it was I forgot the name of the Hurricane Harvey, but
Okay.
it was ridiculous that how durable it is. It is indestructible.
Now, is that now that LGB track, which that's fine. I don't care if you use manufacturer names. Is that plastic ties then, or
Yeah,
are they
they're
treated
plastic,
wood?
but no, they're plastic, and I have a piece of it here. I don't know what the kind of, it's a proprietary material because they
Sure.
sell um, just the ties. But what I had found is that I had a bunch of, I guess for the equivalent would be like HO would be like a 15-inch radius, or no, 30-inch radius curve, like the super tight corners that are absolutely useless to like everybody. You can
Sure.
buy that track for almost nothing.
Okay.
And you can just take the ties off of it and
Hmm.
salvage the ties. Um,
Okay.
for the dollar or something, $1.75, you pay for a 1 foot section of it, and
Hmm.
then you just can slide the ties on to your rail if you get broken ties. But I
Oh.
mean, I have this. My track has gotten put through the ringer, and I never have compared to other brands of track that I've just acquired, where
Hmm.
I've they have like degraded because of like the sunlight. That particular brand of track just seems it's indestructible.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all very useful information. It's very interesting to me, especially like I said, within the next. It's not going to happen this year for sure, but hopefully in the next couple years, I want to get something outside. But I also want to do something durable. Now, uh, one other thing I wanted to touch on now with, I guess, what are you doing as far as roadbed? Like, HO scale, I'm using cork roadbed. Obviously, you can't use cork roadbed outside because it would be gone in a heartbeat or critters or whatever. I guess I know there's several different ways I've seen, but what way did you choose to go as far as for that?
Right. So, I like you, I've seen a bunch of different techniques and for what worked best for, our yard and our landscape is essentially I've used decomposed granite and um depending on what bulk stone material, I could get a hold of it, even crushed concrete, and then you just tamp it down and make a base, and then using you use your different grades of ballast, and what you're limited to what's locally available, but you have to use some
Sure.
type of coarse crushed rock, and then you're just basically shooting a grade, and then like currently I'm using bricks underneath when I lay the track out, and then I'm backfilling the material to where the level of the brick is to know that everything's level because I have such a severe pitch in my yard. But
Mhm,
just like how people make splines,
mhm.
you can do the same thing with there's the like the molding you'd have in your house where it's like that plastic material.
Oh, yeah.
People will cut like take two lengths of that, the 4 inch, and
Mhm.
you'll basically make a spline out of it, and then you'll nail a pipe into the ground, and then you'll screw either side to that, and then and then you'll cut the top of the pipe off, and after you use your level to figure out what the height, and then you're going to screw your track down to that, and
Oh,
then you'll backfill around that, or people even use PVC pipe and screws, but I just let my track just lays on the ground because everything is so heavy
mhm.
once it's all because the tracks are um, they have a little rail clamp that goes on that you screw on, and once those rail clamps are on, that the track does not move. It'll wiggle a little bit, but the weight of the track itself, it doesn't go anywhere. You're just having to lift it up and down to move the material in and out of the rails, just like you would a. It is truly like a miniature railroad when it's outside, especially with regards to ballast and weather. You will constantly have to reballast and level your grades.
So, how much more prototypical could you get than with the way you went,
Right, and
with
that's part of the
using rock,
enjoyment of it. There's always
right,
work to do.
right. Um, And on that note, we will be back. We're going to take a break and we'll have Steven back on when we come back. So stick around because we'll be back shortly.
Looking for a great deal on model railroading? When you find one, you jump on it. And Broadway Limited Imports has one you won't want to miss: the 2025 Conductors Club locomotive, the GE ES44 in HO and N scale. This exclusive club members only release comes at an unbeatable price. HO scale offerings: Paragon Force Sound, DCC with smoke, just $199.99. Stealth DCC ready, only $129.99. N-scale offerings: Paragon Force Sound, DCC $149.99. Stealth DCC ready, $99.99. And check out these stunning road names: CPKC's newest scheme, Western Maryland, Georgia Railroad CSX Heritage Units, and Union Pacific's Pink Ribbon Scheme honoring the fight against breast cancer. You can order these locomotives by May 23rd, 2025. These locomotives are expected to deliver to customers this fall. For more information on the Conductors Club membership and its many perks, visit Broadway-Limited.com. Broadway Limited is a proud partner of the Model Railroad Talk podcast.
Are you tired of seeing the same old clean trains on your layout? Do you want realistic rolling rust buckets or something that looks like it's been around a few years? What about a grimy oil stained locomotive? Alan at Alan's N Scale World is just your guy. He specializes in custom weathering of any scale and has 3 different stages of weathering to choose from. He also hand paints some of the coolest N scale semis and trailers on the market. Get a hold of him today to find out what he can do for your model railroad. You can find him on Facebook at Alan's N Scale World or email him directly at allansnscaleworld@gmail.com. Alan's N Scale World, bringing you scale creations from real life situations.
Do you want a chance to get a free gift certificate to Broadway Limited Imports? Well, look in the description below. There is a link to our form to fill out. It's 1 entry per person. Thank you to Broadway Limited Imports who supports this podcast. Now, if you are interested in getting a second entry, like we said, this is 1 entry per person, but guess what? Our premium supporters who go on over to www.patreon.com/Model Railroad Talk and become a premium supporter by April 26th, 2025, will get a second entry automatically. We'll automatically put you in the list. April 26th, 2025 is the last day that you're going to be able to put your name in the hat, and we will be doing a drawing the following week. And so get your entries in so we have as many as we can to draw from. So good luck to all my listeners, and thank you, Broadway Limited Imports. You guys are great. Here we are back from break. We still have Steven with us, and we are talking about large scale, G scale, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it by the actual scale size, 1/122nd or whatever. In the end, it's all large scale compared to us little HO scale people or N scale people. Um, so Steven, let's move on to what, if you would you mind going through some of the challenges that you've discovered or come across in building your large scale layout?
Absolutely. You know, I've really only been outside doing the large scale for maybe about uh, 5 years, and the learning curve is, I would say, severe. Um, because if you're used to doing indoor modeling, or you've always been an HO, you just assume the same rules apply. And
Mhm.
just the fact that what the weather does to your track and your layout. Cleaning, if I told somebody that I was using sandpaper on my track to clean it, that's like an HO. I was all about, everything was solvents. I have a
Right.
pole sander, and it's got 220 grit paper on it. And before you run, it's, you're walking the layout. with the pole sander just to give just to get some of the crud because it rains. All of the all your ballast, all your rock, everything settles onto the rail. You have
Mhm.
to go out with you have to buy a leaf blower. I never thought a little stick falling out. And then when you think about it, that little stick that falls out of the tree is like a scale 40-foot redwood falling in front of
Right,
your train.
right.
And I've burned up some motors, because it's, you turn everything on and you walk away and you think it's fine and you're outside and it's windy and then, all the little, everything starts falling out of the trees
Mhm.
and you just in you got a indentation in your rail and, it's anything that can happen to a regular locomotive can happen to your outdoor layout,
Right. Sure.
except the hazmat spill, hopefully.
Right. Well, that
Yeah,
depends. It depends on if
yeah,
you have a
that does
something.
depend.
Yeah, going back to what you're saying about getting the sanding stick out with 220 grit sandpaper, most of us that are indoor layouts, I guarantee you there's a few of us cringing like, "Ooh," cuz you don't want to use abrasives if you can keep from it. Now, I use basically it's a Bright Boy, which is a light abrasive eraser only in my bad areas, but I'm using alcohol and rubbing alcohol and
Right.
stuff like that where yeah, but there again, I can understand where you're coming from outdoor. You're pushing more power through it, and like you stated earlier, you've got more rail there, and you're not really
There's a
worried about
lot.
getting yeah.
Right. And this rail is like the rail I've had like on my main line has been, it is legitimately 50 years old
Mhm.
and I've used a pole sander on it since I've had it and I'm not sure how the person who had it before me used it, but like even on the turnouts the railheads are not flat, there's no
Mhm.
damage. And I do have like the green Scotch brake pads and I've used brake cleaner on a
Mhm.
rag and that left a little bit of residue, but I use mineral spirits, but every once in a while I do have to get it out. And I run all metal wheels, and just like everybody indoors, like the plastic wheels, like you run those plastic wheels, and it's you're in Texas and it's 103 degrees out, and that rail's been sitting in the sun. Your wheel is literally going to like stink onto the track down to the axle. I mean, you
Right.
could burn your hand on that rail. So you've got to run metal you've got to run all the metal wheels and you're upgrading everything just like you do in HO.
Well, and but you're upgrading for a little bit. I mean, like me upgrading my wheels to metal wheel sets. Yes, it's to help keep the rails clean a little longer and for performance, but you're upgrading it for a few other reasons. Like one, like you just stated, the fact that plastic wheels are going to melt. So,
Right. Plus we're
where
running over like, I'm running over like real stones, and
sure,
grit and whatever, ballast material pops up from a rainstorm or,
hmm
and just like we have like everybody has like their own little track cleaning car, little invention unique to for their little prototype railroad. But we have cars that you put out in front of your engine and put the little Scotch pad on it, and it's got the little stuff that goes down in there and kind of knocks the debris out from the rails when you make that first run, so you're not hitting any. Even the leaves are terrible if y'all can imagine just a fall
yeah.
day and just trying to run that train over through like 8 inches of leaves.
So what you're saying is, even in South Texas, you don't you have like up here we would have snow that would keep us back unless we had the plow and all that good stuff. Down there, you have times where you can't run because of outside of the storms and stuff. You have times where if you'd like to go out and run, you can't because of the housekeeping on it. Then,
Right. I mean, some like when if you have like a heavily our area, it's heavily I don't say heavily forested, but it's a lot of trees and when you get there's one part of the year when the leaves all bud out and they drop everything down
oh,
and
yeah,
right and I mean all the sap and everything that falls out if you really worked hard on like trying to like you painted a few coaches and you did a few cars and you leave them out, and all that sap that drips out from those trees
Oh,
gets on top of that new paint job. I mean, that's it. Like the roofs are toasted. That's why it's really hard to like, if you really are into that fine detail,
mhm.
as a smaller scale modeler and you go outside, it's like it will crush your soul because you just spent 40 hours working on this car and you put it out there and a bird poops on it, and then the sap from the trees gets on top of it, and you just can't pick that stuff off without messing up your paint job.
Right. Goes back to
So
how much detail's too much, and what's funny is, prime example for me when I was getting back into this a few years ago, I was contemplating between N scale and HO. I wanted to go N scale, more obviously reasons, more track and this and that. Um, but I decided HO also, not only the size, because let's face it, we're none of us are getting any younger, but, I wanted to be able to put more detail into this stuff, and so the theory of, okay, go larger scale, the more detail you can do, and from what I'm hearing from you, unless you're doing an indoor G scale or large scale railroad, eh, s extra details is really not good then, because like you just said, it'll crush your soul if, you know, bird or tree sap or something, you know?
right, it's from people that I've talked to that have been in the hobby a long time, they're always, it just has to look good from 10 feet away because you're with this newer layout build I'm working on, it's, I'm getting everything about 3 feet off the ground.
Mhm.
But, when you think if you have 280 feet of track, how much earth are you moving to create 3 feet off the ground and then still have like,
Right.
reasonable areas around the layout where you're creating scenery and structures? I mean, there's just
Mhm.
tons and like the physical toll of trying to build a layout, to do that, you only have, you're trying to use your time effectively. So
Right.
it's, you just want to put enough into it where it looks really good, but you
Right.
still have to like make the layout happen.
Sure. Now, moving, I guess, kind of, if this would be a challenge, I can see, based on what I've seen, unless I haven't seen all the areas you can go to, um, what what is available for large scale, or say like the scale you're doing? Do you have, obviously, I'm sure you don't have the product line that I would, or we would have, like an HO or N scale. Has that been kind of a challenge to be able to get what you want?
It's been pretty frustrating, and like all my stuff, I don't have anything I don't own a single thing that's ever been brand new. So, most of my locomotives are from the late 80s, and then it's,
Mm,
I've bought a locomotive that didn't work for, a few $100s, and you put $100 of parts and 20 hours of your time into it with some styrene and glue and rattle
mm,
cans and weathering powders, and you just try to, I don't want to say it's not a craftsman scale, but the scale is large enough where there's no barrier of entry with the tools, so
okay.
you can, everything. If you're, I don't say like a middle-aged dad, but I mean, if you've got all your dad stuff,
Mhm,
you can make just about anything if you're patient and you practice with it. But you have to make a lot of your stuff because there really isn't a ton of, you don't have the variety in the large scale, especially for the locomotives. It seems like it's really fallen off the past
mm,
10 years with the variety that's out there. Plus, especially for scale, a lot of the diesel equipment is 129, and then if you
mhm,
have stuff that's 122, it just, your locomotive looks so tiny next
sure.
to a 40-foot box car. Like it looks so weird that
Mhm,
it almost, I don't want to say you don't want to get it, but it just, unless all, it just, it's tough to like create the illusion or create that immersion
mhm,
with your layout just because of the slight differences amongst all the manufacturers. Plus, it just so some of the stuff is like a new steam locomotive. I mean, you're spending over $1,000
Oh
in
yeah.
large scale. You're talking 1,700, and some that's not some people that's just not in their budget.
Right. I mean, I can get that because I know even in HO scale that they're up there for some of the brass stuff is up there too, but but it's protected inside. So to be able to spend $1,700 for something that you're going to take outside and the weather or animal, whatever nature can,
Oh,
either
I'm
be
scared to
nice
death.
or yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm like, it's gonna rain.
Get them inside.
That's
No
exactly
weathering
it.
today.
Yep.
All right. So let's move on to so we just talked about some of the challenges that you've come up with. Now, what are some of the favorite things about large scale in comparison for you and to maybe some of the smaller scales? I guess what's some of the favorite things for large scale for you?
I guess really, personally, large scale, um, just as like a family decision for us, we've always been like kind of like, an outdoor family. We spend a lot of time in the garden. We have chickens that run all over our layout. We have free range birds, and
Sure.
we do the organic gardening thing with no chemicals or whatever. But we're it's another reason to be outside. Like most of my layout was built, um, you know, when everyone was little and I was, at work all day. You put the baby to bed, you give her a bottle, and then, I would be out there from 11:30 to 2 in the morning with the lights on in the backyard, building the layout, and then I'm up at, 5:45 for work, and that was the only way the layout got done.
Right.
But at least it was like a place to go. Like it gives you the outdoor layout is a nice, I won't say like it's a Zen garden, but it's,
Mhm.
when everything is so busy, it gets you outside. At least you're getting fresh air. Like you're outside and you see a lot of things. If you're working outdoors and you're building your garden railroad, you see stuff. Not to get all Animal Planet, but you
Right.
see stuff when you're out there and you've got your hands in the dirt and you're working on that layout. You see stuff you did not know you had in your yard.
Right. I'm sure. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, you're getting down and dirty. You're getting in touch with the earth. I mean, unless you're doing an outdoor one that like I've seen where people hang them on their privacy fence, but building like what you're doing, yeah, I could totally see that. Um, so is there or what are any tips, I guess, that you could give someone like kind of like myself or anybody else that are maybe looking at going into not only large scale, but actually doing an outdoor large scale railroad?
I would say the biggest, like the first thing is, in regards to track, um, there's various varieties, but they're called rail clamps. And, I spent 2 years, trying to figure out, because I had all these little 1 foot and 2 foot long sections of track, and they're just, with the rail joiners, just like those little silver rail joiners, just like you
Yep.
had for HO scale, but you can't, it's not really practical to uh, solder these rails because the heat it takes. Plus, you'd have to take the ties off each time to
Hmm.
do it. I had no idea that there were these little clamps that you could get that you just screw on, and it tightens up that connection to where you don't have any electrical issues. And
Oh,
because
okay.
that just kills it when you're 2 feet, it stops. 2 feet, it stops, and you're thinking, is there something wrong with the electrical pickups on the locomotive?
Mm.
Um, so that was the biggest thing, and it's an investment in the beginning because
Sure.
essentially every connection you have, you're paying $5
Oh,
per.
okay.
That's just about what it's going to cost you. Even if
Mhm.
it's you know $3 to $5 per little section, but it's worth it. And then, like anything, you start off small because it's
Right.
even 30 feet of track is overwhelming when you first lay it all down, and it's like okay, I put it on the ground, let's go. But
Uh-huh.
once nature happens outside, um I'd say you always start out small so you can rail fan your own layout, and then get some turnouts, and then work on whatever your extension is,
Hmm.
and just let that take as much time as it needs, because you can't really rush anything, because you pay for it when you cut corners, when you're
Sure.
building an outdoor layout.
Sure. I got you. Well, those are some good tips, definitely. I know, sitting here talking with you over this time frame, it's really got my gears turning, and it's like that's not good because I need to finish my my HO scale. But um, yeah, those are some really good tips and things to think about. Um, I guess any other thoughts on large scale?
Um, I would say that large scale is for sure. It's probably, I can't believe it took me this long to that it would, like, I spend a lot of time. Everything was always about HO, and I never really gave large scale a thought, just because I didn't really appreciate, like, I thought it was like a toy scale almost. Like, I thought large scale was like what you set up around the Christmas tree. And I
Right.
just didn't think that I could, bring the level of realism or the modeling to it. But it's a little bit more work, and it's challenging in a different way.
Hmm.
But, I've appreciated the scale, and it's been a rewarding challenge to maybe grow as a modeler, you
Sure.
know, going outside and, doing this version of the hobby.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying with all that. My last layout. Shoot, this has been now 20 some years ago, over 20 years ago. I was HO scale, and I had an opportunity to purchase some. Basically, it was an Aristocraft train set where it had the little. I think it was a four axle. Yeah, it was a four axle switcher, and I think it had a boxcar, flat car, and caboose and track, and I got it at a good price. I'm like, sweet, I'll buy it. Didn't know what I was going to do with it. Well, then I started purchasing a few more cars and more track. And at the time, I was planning on doing an outdoor layout. I had actually set some track out to see how that particular track was going to weather, but then unfortunately, I went through a divorce and long, for argument's sake, lost that uh, G scale stuff. Um, but I've always been, ever since I've had that set, it was like, "Oh, this is cool." And when I got back into the hobby, obviously I knew I was gonna build an indoor railroad, but I I always thought back to the G scale, and man, it definitely, you're right about the availability is just not there like it used to be 20 years ago of uh Aristocraft, which is out of business now or was bought out or whatever. I mean, they made some fine stuff, but the only thing you can find is like on eBay, and even that, it's slim pickings. So
And that's where
uh
most of my collection is, Facebook Marketplace,
mm,
eBay, the different Facebook swap pages.
sure.
And, I don't have a single thing that's new. But, then again, I'm paying, most of my, to get it in my hand. A lot of my passenger cars and freight cars I'm not spending more than $60. So,
Right.
that's what when you hold a HO car in your hand, I'm getting something I can carry like a bread loaf. And, when you
Right.
look at, like, like the Sam's Club idea,
Yeah.
like, I sure did get a lot of train for my $60, you
Yeah.
know.
And in reality too, with it being outside, kind of going back just a touch, you were talking about being outside and with the outdoors. I guess when we were talking before this, you were talking about your neighbors would come out and watch and stuff. And, just, I know for me, once I am able to get something out in our front lawn, once we do our landscaping, just to be able to see the look on people's faces and watch them enjoy, even if it's just meaning it's a train going around in circles and seeing it outside, the enjoyment of seeing that smile on whether it be an elder person or a child's face, just seeing that, I think that's worth the price of
Right.
admission, if you will.
Yeah, you become a landmark when you have that in the garden. I mean, people
Mhm.
will go out of their way to come see it, regardless of how what level you think you've achieved with it to the to the everybody person. It's
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, it's earth I don't say earth shattering, but it's like everybody
Right.
just the phone immediately comes out, the video goes on,
Mhm.
they're following the track in a circle, just recording out, walking into tree branches, just everyone's
Right.
always amazed with it. The excitement factor is fantastic.
Right. Now, you have a Facebook page that you have dedicated for your railroad, don't you?
I do. It's the Arcade Valley Garden Railroad. It's fairly new, and really, it's just I had done a few little projects, and it's really just for somebody that's never, say, modeled in in large scale before. But there's certainly a lot of troubleshooting things on the post where at least it's a conversation starter, or there's a few scratch builds where I took a 2.26 and turned it into a 2.80, and just because
Sure.
there's some stuff that's just like I said before, $1,700. I took
Right.
you know two broken locomotives and fused
Mhm.
them together, to make a project. But you do have to a lot of the stuff after you get comfortable. If you're willing to melt some plastic, you can the scale is big enough where you can make most things that you want to make.
Sure. 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 So, with your Facebook page, we'll put a link in the description of this podcast below. And I understand where you're coming from as far as you don't do a lot with it, but I like I like to be able to promote those pages just because you never know. There might be that one person that will go to that page and that's all they need for inspiration and they go out and start building their outdoor railroad. Um, so yeah, if there's I guess anything else you would like to chat about as far as large scale.
Just I guess in closing,
Mhm.
I just say that I think it's worth anybody that does some of the I want to say the smaller scales because it's acting like because something's larger it's better, but it's um, I would recommend for everybody to during the summer, or if you're up north and you're snowed in, you know get an inexpensive starter set and try it outside. You can still do the operations in the garden, and it's when you add movement to your outdoor landscape, you know it makes it more enjoyable, especially since we all love railroads. It's a good
Yep,
way to get you out of the house and enjoy the backyard.
sure. I know for me up here, I've seen the videos. I can't wait to get mine started here in a few years because I want to be able to put the locomotive out and have a wedge snow plow on the front and be able to push snow. So, I mean, that's just kind of something I want to be able to do. So,
It's fun until you try it.
right.
I did that. We got snow this winter in Texas, and you know, it, after 3 feet, it was like, okay, that's enough. It takes a few locomotives with that
Sure.
wedge snowplow.
Sure. All right. On that note, thank you, Stephen, for coming on to our show. Really, really appreciate this. You coming on and talking to the listeners about large scale. I know we've had Eric on talking about 1 inch scale, which is basically right on size, but it's been good to have you on here to have somebody come on and talk about a scale that we haven't really had a lot of conversation on. So, thank you for coming on and hope to have you back on a future episode with some updates for your railroad.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. And there you have it, folks. Our interview with Steven, I apologize, from South Texas. And great information. I know I learned, I don't want to say necessarily learned a lot, but it made me think a lot with wanting to do an outdoor and obviously nothing the size that he's doing. Of course, I don't have the land that he does. Yeah, but I want to do one, and I've said this before. We want to landscape the front of our house a little bit, and especially around the flagpole. And I just want to put in a small loop, maybe a passing siding, and one spur. Just something simple, more or less to rail fan my trains, my G scale trains. When I get to that point, I haven't bought anything yet, but with listening to him and learning about the track and stuff like that, I know for me, it made me really think about what to look for, and maybe you don't necessarily need to buy that brand new locomotive or the bigger ones. While yes, we talked about too how much detail is too much detail. Well, he kind of defunct that with the large scale. And but on the flip side of it, you know, uh, you don't necessarily need to go all out and buy brand new locomotives, because those bigger ones, you have a little bit more room to work. So if you have to rebuild one, like he said, he took 2 steam locomotives and built a steam locomotive he wants. So with the bigger scale to me, and I've experienced it just a little bit with my old railroad, or when I had my old railroad, I had some G scale stuff, and I was in the preparations of trying to figure out where I was going to put it, how I was going to build my outdoor railroad, that kind of thing. And and you have a little bit more room to work on things, and if you want to remotor it, okay, you might be able to find the motors and stuff like that. But on the flip side of it, you're getting up there in that larger stuff where you have less and less ready components and stuff like that to be able to repair. So you have to think outside the box, as he has done and said, to get what he wanted and get his trains running. So great interview with him. And as always, we really appreciate having you guys come on and talk about your experiences and, of your railroad, and what you have come across. That's what this whole podcast is about. Um, Before we get going any farther, and I'm getting to the page right now, my book was not cooperating. We are going to go with our 400 plus thrilling, unbelievable train facts for enthusiasts. So for this episode, we're pulling out of the chapter Unforgettable Moments in Railroad History. The opening of Stockton and Darlington Railway on September 27th, 1925, the Stockton and Darlington Railway became the world's first public railway to carry both passengers and freight using steam locomotives. This historic event marked the beginning of the railway age and transformed the transportation worldwide. So, another great, interesting fact. If you listen to it and you're taking those in, I know I do, and I have not read one of these beforehand. I don't even read it right before the episode or right before I record this. I wait so I learn with you. Now, moving on to a few other things before we let you go for this episode. Reminder, uh, obviously, Broadway Limited supports this podcast, and they have graciously given us, and I know I sound like a parrot every episode, but they've given us a gift certificate to their website. There is a link in the description below, take you over to a form, or you can now actually go to our website, ModelRailroadTalk.com, and at the top left, you'll see some, home and stuff like that. And there's actually giveaway. So if you click on that giveaway, it'll take you to that page, which has the link to the form. Fill it out, send it in, submit it, whatever you want to call it. Submit it right there online, and we will get you put into our system on our end. 1 entry per person. But as we've stated, if you become a premium supporter before or I should say by April 26th, which is the last day we're allowing this. So any submissions after 12 o'clock, or I should say 11:59 p.m. on April 26th will not be counted. But if you become a premium supporter by that time, you will get automatically entered, and not only automatically entered, but you will get a second entry added in. So it's just another great way to, you can do that through patreon.com/model railroad talk, but it's another way for you to get a great deal from our friends over at Broadway Limited. And when you're over at our website, modelrailroadtalk.com, check out all the pages. We have revamped the website to make it a little more friendly. We took away the forums and groups just because people weren't using them. That's perfectly fine. There's plenty of other great groups and forums out there. And I figured we'd use it to, I would convert it over to where you have access to this podcast, audio podcast. There's links on there. There's a page for that. We actually, I'm actually working on getting a contact page on there to where you can reach out to us, email us, that kind of thing. Also on that page, you can go see updates for my railroad, for Benjamin's railroad. There's a whole bunch on there, good information. I am planning on down the road, and it takes time to do this on the website, but I'm planning on down the road maybe adding a tips page, that kind of thing, listener submitted tips, that kind of thing. But it all takes time. If I focused all on that, I wouldn't have time to do this audio or videos that like one we just put out yesterday on YouTube. So check that out. And we now, if you've seen it on Facebook or you've seen it on YouTube, we have our new t-shirt design, which I actually really like. And I've had a couple people reach out and order them and pay for them. And actually I just got them in today. So in the next day or so, I'm going to get them shipped out to them. But we actually now have a storefront for it. Right now we're only offering t-shirts, but I'm actually working with the place that I get them from. That storefront may be switching to their storefront, because then you can order I have a link on the website that takes you to that, but then you would be able to order it, they'll fulfill it, ship it to you, and it'll make it a lot more seamless, or I should say less or more seamless. Yeah, I can't think of a process, and a little quicker process. But if you go over there and order t-shirts, I really appreciate it. It does help this podcast. And if I switch over to them, which I think I'm going to end up doing, we'll actually be able to offer sweatshirts as well. So, and possibly other apparel as time goes on. So, reach out to us, modelrailroadtalk@gmail.com. If you have any questions regarding the YouTube channel, our Facebook page, this audio podcast, or any suggestions for future episodes. If you think you have something interesting and you'd like to possibly come on the show to talk about, we can talk about that. But also, if there's some apparel or something like that that you would like to see on the site that you would like to buy to be able to support this podcast, reach out to us. You can reach out to us through that email I just gave you, modelrailroadtalk@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, modelrailroadtalk.com. On the final note, I want to thank everybody that has, if you're listening to this and you've gone to the YouTube channel, or you listen to this through our YouTube channel, I want to thank everybody for all the subscribes on our channel there. We have surpassed 900, and right now we're holding steady about just a little over 900, which I'm perfectly fine with, because it jumped up over the last several weeks. We're getting so close to that 1,000 mark, and I really appreciate it. I really do. It means the world to me. It just, like talking with somebody and seeing another railroad It excites me to get working on mine and build mine. Seeing you guys make those numbers climb, it excites me for the podcast and the videos and stuff like that, to makes me want to do more for you. So, on that note, if you have any questions, like we said, modelrailroadtalk@gmail.com. You can go to our Facebook page as well, Model Railroad Talk, or hit us up over there, like our page over there. Go to not TikTok, YouTube, and give us a subscribe over there. Or if you are interested in becoming a premium member, like we said, you can go to Model Railroad Talk, patreon.com/Model Railroad Talk. We have a couple different plans over there. And or if you don't want to get into like a plan kind of thing, you just want to do one-time donation, reach out to us. We have a PayPal account, and you can also do it through buymeacoffee.com/ModelRailTalk. And any kind of support in that aspect will actually would classify you as a premium supporter. So you would get that extra entry for the giveaway. And I didn't say this for the giveaway, but there is no purchase necessary. So you can sign up for it. And we're not going to sit there and say, hey, you need to buy a sticker or t-shirt or nothing like that. So anyways, on that note, I've been yapping long enough. So you know what? As we always say, folks, keep your train on the tracks.